Good morning. Thank you, Valerie. What a powerful message. And I love the ideas for application. I love application. So I want to talk today about how we can do the things that Valerie talked about, and we can do the things that Gordon talked about as he shared the vision. I know I sell chicken for a living. Some of you know that, but I know that you probably don't, but we still have something in common. The last 24 months have been bonkers. And I would argue it was hard before the pandemic. The distractions, the complexity, the competing priorities, in many cases, resource scarcity. And so my team began to work several years ago, pre-pandemic, on how to help leaders be more effective in the midst of all that craziness. We had no idea, of course, that the pandemic was coming, but we found that the work we've done has actually been very, very timely, because we don't think the pandemic created as many problems as it magnified the existing conditions and the existing problems. And we were looking for a way to describe this mess. And so we decided to call it quicksand. Now, I don't know if you've ever been in quicksand or not. I personally have not, and I don't want to try it, but I decided to study it. And so I began reading the firsthand accounts of people who'd been in it. And they said things such as a feeling of hopelessness, a feeling of helplessness. Some described it as a loneliness. Many were overcome by the strength and the power of the quicksand. Yeah, that describes what some of us are feeling like over the last 2 years. Thankfully, I think we're coming out of it. But as I mentioned, I think some of these conditions pre-existed, and they're going to be there once we come out of the pandemic. And so I think that's what we have to grapple with as leaders, so that we can do the things that Valerie has encouraged us to do, and do all the things that you want to do to accomplish your hopes and your dreams and your aspirations for your life, your leadership, and your organization. But like I said, this is not new. I want to be sure that we don't deceive ourselves and think that, well, if we can go back to pre-pandemic conditions, we'll be fine. No, we probably won't. We've got to aim higher than that. Let me give you a couple stats. Pre-pandemic, if you're like most people, I just leave it at that. I won't point too sharp a finger here, but you were tapping, swiping, opening, liking something on a device 2,617 times a day. You're sending and receiving on average 94 text messages a day. Pre-pandemic, there were 432,000 hours of new YouTube content every day. That's why we can't watch all the cat videos. It is literally raining cat videos. You say, well, that's not my problem. Well, that's good. I'll tell you something you might have experienced pre-pandemic, and that's distractions. The research indicates that if you worked in an office, remember offices, some people used to have them. If you worked in an office environment pre-pandemic, you were interrupted on average every 3 minutes. And some of you are going, yeah, well, that sounds about right. And what did you do? Well, you just learned to cope. And I'm assuming that many of you, like me, just kind of learned to cope with those distractions. But there's a fundamental problem with that level of interruption. The psychologists tell us that on average, it takes 20 minutes to regain the level of clarity and focus that we had before the interruption. So you know where this is going. If you walk into your place of business with a clear mind, focused on the activities of the day, and you get interrupted, and you get interrupted, and you get interrupted, you could actually end the day never having regained the mental acuity and focus and level of clarity that you had at the beginning of the day. That's just a problem. And so again, once we began to discover this, my team and I began to talk to leaders about this stuff we call quicksand. And I'll remember one of the very first leaders we interviewed, we were kind of proud at all that we had discovered and said, hey, tell us, can you relate to all of this? And the leader said, well, I understand it, but that's not my problem. We said, okay. We said, let's ask the question this way. What's holding you back from your full potential? What's impeding the level of impact and influence you want in the world? And we thought reframing the question, he'd probably say, well, yeah, it probably is distractions. It probably is complexity. He said, well, I've got a whole different list. And we said, well, what's on your list? And he said, fatigue, fear, aimlessness. He even said success is probably holding me back from reaching my full potential. So we went, whoa, what do we do with that? So guess what? We just decided to put it all in the same bucket. And what we began to grapple with at that point is that anything holding you back from reaching your full potential as a leader is your quicksand. And it's a toxic mix, but each and every one of us may have a little different blend. Some have a measure of complexity, some have a measure of fear, some have a measure of success. I don't know what your quicksand is, but our team began to focus on let's help leaders escape. Because here's the deal. Once you're in quicksand and your leadership effectiveness has been impeded, there are only three options. One is you just sink. You just kind of give up. You give in. You die. I mean, you don't really die, but your hopes, your dreams, and your aspirations are extinguished in the quicksand. You just can't do it anymore. I actually think that's a part of this great resignation we keep hearing about. I mean, some people are putting a positive spin on it and saying that the pandemic has caused people to reflect on what's important in life, and I understand all that. But I think some people who are taking part in this phenomena, they're just exhausted. The quicksand has won. Well, we don't want anybody to take that option. So the second option, which is the one I see most often, is leaders who say, I'm just going to swim in the quicksand. I know how to lead. And they just keep swimming. There's a fundamental problem here, and probably a couple. One is it's exhausting. And I think if you're not careful, you'll end up in that first bucket I talked about, if you just keep trying to swim in the quicksand. But the nearer term problem is you and I have never done our best work swimming in quicksand. You've never heard of anyone winning a gold medal swimming in quicksand. Your effectiveness and your impact is going to be impeded if that's the choice you make. So the third option is the one that we decided to focus on, and that's how to help all of us escape the quicksand. Now, we sort of stumbled on that when we found leaders who were strangers to the quicksand. They might have been in it from time to time in the past, but they were really good at getting out of it, and they had developed an ability to stay out of it. So we spent a couple of years looking at this question of how do these leaders do what seems impossible to the majority of leaders? And so let me tell you a story to introduce what we discovered. Some of you remember the movie Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. Now, if you're under 30, you may not. I spoke to a group of young leaders recently, and they said, Indiana who? So if you don't know Indiana Jones, you need to go Google it. Harrison Ford, bunch of great movies, adventurer, archaeologist. You'll have to look it up. But let me talk about the climactic scene in The Last Crusade. And for any of you that saw the movie, you know what I'm about to describe. So Indiana Jones is looking for the Holy Grail, the mythical cup of Christ. And it is reported that if you drink from the cup, you'll have eternal life. And so he's looking for it. Movie goes on and on and on and on. He finally finds himself in a cave full of cups and a knight who is now guarding the cups, who has been there for 700 years, which gives some credibility to the eternal life claim, but that's not the point of the story. So Indiana is looking at all these cups, trying to figure out which one might be the one. And at that moment, the bad guy shows up, and he wants the cup as well. And so with few options, Indiana, under great duress, gives the option to the villain. The villain then goes, surveys the cups, and chooses the one that is the most bedazzled. It looks like it's made of solid gold and it's covered in precious stones. He takes the cup, fills it with water, takes a drink, and in just a matter of seconds, literally melts right there, a horrific death. And the knight says the now famous line, "He chose poorly." So now the choice is deferred to Indiana. And he has a different set of criteria. And he goes and chooses a hand-carved wooden cup, very simple. And he said, now that's the cup of a carpenter. And the knight says, you have chosen wisely. So what we discovered after all of this time, energy, effort, and research is that it is in fact our choices that are our pathway out of the quicksand. Now, let me quickly say, we make a lot of choices every day as human beings. Some psychologists believe between 30 and 35,000 choices a day. That's not what I'm talking about. We decided to label these strategic choices that I'm about to unpack for you. We call them smart choices, and smart leaders make smart choices. So let me give you a quick working definition. A smart choice is one that requires a little more focus, a little more attention. You need to be a little more diligent, but it yields a disproportionate return. Now, the good news for all of us is we didn't discover 75 of these. We discovered 4. And all I'm going to be able to do in the moment is kind of unpack these for you. But I want to give you a resource at the end so that you can go deeper if you think this might be helpful. So 4 smart choices. See, let me say this about choices. Choices give us agency. They give us responsibility. And they give us accountability. If you're still in quicksand, you got to go back and say, am I making the smart choices so that I can get out and lead from higher ground? 4 choices. First choice, all smart leaders make, is they choose to confront reality. The best leaders know that you need to be grounded in truth so that you can lead from a position of strength. Now, just so that I don't leave you hanging, I'm going to give you one strategy / tactic to go with each of these. So on this one, you might say, well, I would love to confront reality, but that sounds hard. It can be very hard. It can be very difficult. It can be very challenging. We all have blind spots. Some have more than others. So the strategy that I would suggest for you to consider is to find fresh eyes. Valerie mentioned this, the whole mentoring process. Mentoring is a tactic that you can use to find fresh eyes. Maybe you hire a coach. Maybe you build a personal board of directors. Maybe you use your Rotarian group to help give you fresh eyes on your current reality. Smart leaders make the choice to confront reality. The second smart choice that smart leaders always make is they grow capacity. Now, this sounds crazy, and it even sounds counterintuitive. Let's stay with this. If someone is drowning and you approach them and say, hey, let me give you some swimming lessons, they're kind of going, I don't want swimming lessons. And when you start talking about growing capacity to men and women in quicksand, they're going, I need a life ring. I don't need some encouragement to grow capacity, but you have to have capacity to get out of the quicksand. And so again, there are many, many strategies and tactics. I'll give you perhaps the most obvious. Please don't confuse the simplicity of this suggestion with its impact. Just like Indy, he chose the simple cup, not the one that was bedazzled, right? So this is not a bedazzled idea. But if you want to grow capacity, start with your calendar. Now you're thinking, well, my calendar's full. That's the point. Some of you know the name Peter Drucker. Many believe he was the greatest management and leadership thinker of the last 2,000 years. If you've not read The Effective Executive, specifically one of Drucker's, 50 books or so, you ought to read The Effective Executive. But in that book, and this was written 50 years ago, he said he had never met a knowledge worker. That's me and you. He has a lengthy definition of a knowledge worker, but that's us. He had never met a knowledge worker that couldn't eliminate 25% of what was on their calendar with no ill effect. Now, I don't know your number. It's hard for me to keep up with my number, but I'm always trying to reduce the number of things that I can eliminate with no ill effects. Think about it this way. For every 10 minutes you save, you just added 10 minutes to your personal capacity, at least in the arena of time. Because obviously there are other arenas. You want to grow your energy, and there are other things you want to. We're not going to get into that today, but I want to start with something really easy. Look at your calendar for next week and see if there's something you can take off your calendar. And if not, look at the next week. And that's one very simple, for most folks, low-hanging fruit. Maybe it's an hour-long meeting that you can reduce to 30 minutes. You just grew your capacity by 30 minutes. So capacity is essential, and it's one of the smart choices. You have to always be working to grow your capacity. The third smart choice that all smart leaders make is to fuel curiosity. They fuel curiosity. So I've been asked forever, is there a leadership fountain of youth? And my response historically has been, well, I hope so. I mean, because I want to add value as a leader till my last dying breath. So I hope there is. Well, I don't give that answer anymore. Now I say there is absolutely a leadership fountain of youth, and it's curiosity. It's curiosity. Smart leaders choose to fuel curiosity. Again, a number of strategies and tactics that you can employ. Let me share one with you that I think many of you are already doing this, but perhaps you can do more. And I call it ask, don't tell. It's about the power of questions. Jim Collins, the author of Good to Great, Built to Last, and other leadership and business classics, is a friend of our organization, and he's spoken for our annual meeting on a couple of occasions. And I remember the time that Jim spoke, and he asked us all to consider our question to statement ratio. Okay, I'm processing. Okay, how many questions you ask to how many statements you make as a leader? And he said, I want to challenge you to double that. So let that sink in for a second. Double the number of questions you ask to the number of statements that you make. And while we were still processing that, he said, and then double it again. Like double it again. There are so many great things that happen when you and I ask more questions. Now, it doesn't mean we won't ever tell someone what needs to be done or tell someone what our vision is. That makes perfect sense. But I believe asking great questions is one of the most undervalued tools and levers in a leader's toolbox. And I would encourage you to develop a list of favorite questions. Just to give you a couple of tactical examples, let me share a few of mine. And I don't know, if we had time, we'd get in the chat and let you share yours. You've got favorite questions, but are you using questions enough? So here are a few that I ask. One, I try to ask multiple times a day. And I would say on my best days, I ask it throughout the day. And it's this: specifically, comma, what are we trying to accomplish? Or what am I trying to accomplish, depending on the context? And I'm going to say it before I have this opportunity to speak to you. I'm going to say it before I send an email. I'm going to say it before a meeting. In a meeting, if there are 7 agenda items, when we get to that second item, if whoever's facilitating doesn't tell the group in the first 30 seconds why this is on the agenda and what we're trying to accomplish, I'm going to raise my hand and say, I've got a process question. Specifically, what are we trying to accomplish? And so that just keeps me focused on outcomes. It helps our organization and my team stay focused on outcomes. So that's one of my favorite questions. Let me give you one or two more. When we're in a planning session, I love to ask the question, particularly if it's a long-term planning. Let me clarify, a longer-term planning session. What do we want to be true in a decade that's not true today? Now, I love that question. I think that's a great question for us personally. I think it's a great question for our fitness and our faith and our family. I think it's a great question for our finances. I think it's a great question for our team and our organization. What do we want to be true in a decade that's not true today? That helps us pull up, right? Because as leaders, we always have to manage the heads up, heads down tension. And if we get caught in heads down, that's another form of quicksand. Because if we're not thinking about the future, chances are real good that our teams are not thinking about the future. So let me share one more just for fun. I love this question, particularly when you've got something to communicate, and especially if it has any level of complexity to it. I ask the question, how would I explain this, or how would I communicate this to a small child? And I have actually been known to go find a small child, I like aged 5 or 6, and try to explain something to them. And if I can explain it to them, I can probably explain it to you. And so that's just another question. I think you see, it's like arrows in your quiver. And so I would encourage you to begin, if you haven't already, begin collecting questions, begin using questions. And when you do, you're gonna fuel your curiosity. The fourth and final choice that all great leaders make, all smart leaders make, is they choose to create change. They choose to create change. You can actually make those first 3 choices and be an awful leader, because change is our job, right? Some leaders, I'm not sure where this came from, they think of change as an inconvenience or a burden. It's like, no, actually, change is your job, and you have to choose to make change, create change. It's fantastic to be grounded in reality. It's tremendous if you've got capacity, and you're going to be better off if you're a curious, smart leader. But you actually you got to pull the trigger. You have to create change. And both Gordon and Valerie mentioned it, is that you guys are about doing good in the world. You're people of action. This is the action step, and it's always a choice. Individuals, teams, nor organizations are going to drift to a better place. You just don't drift to greatness. It's because a leader has said, we are choosing to create change. Now, it's going to be time consuming, and the difficult changes almost always are, and you just have to accept that. I had a CEO tell me recently, as we went through these choices with her team, she said afterwards, she says, that all sounds hard. And I said, well, you've chosen a hard profession. And I didn't mean her being the CEO. I'm just saying all of us in leadership, we have chosen a hard profession. I hope it's your calling. I hope it's your passion, because it's not going to be easy. None of it is easy. And for many reasons, including the quicksand that I started with. But when you get ready to create change, you have to understand that most people don't want to go where you want to go. Most people don't like change. So just be ready. You need to be convinced that your picture of the future, that your vision is worth pursuing, and understand that everyone won't go with you, and that's okay too. But you have to be ready to create change. And that will make all the difference in the world. Now, as I went through those very, 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 very quickly, I'm assuming that you have questions. That's just kind of the nature of this type of presentation. So I want to do two things for you in the form of, one's a resource, but first I want to give you my cell number, because you may want to call me or you may want to text me. I get calls and texts every day from people all over the world. My cell number is 678-612-8441. And so if I can serve you or your team, let me know. Secondly, we have actually created an assessment, and it's a smart leader assessment, and it helps go deeper on the 4 choices, and it's free. By the way, I want to say that right up front. By the way, and I do write books, and I give all the money to charity, so I'm not selling anything here, but it's a free assessment, and it actually helps you go deeper to diagnose opportunities, not just at the high level, but at the strategy and the tactical level. Again, it may be crystal clear. When you hear those choices, you may go, oh, I know exactly what I need to work on. Well, if you do, fantastic, get started. But if you would like to do that assessment, you can find it at markmillerleadership.com. markmillerleadership.com. Again, a free assessment. You'll get a printout of your results and says, based on your answers, here are some things you may want to work on. And again, if I can serve you, that'd be fantastic. I'd love the opportunity. So let me close with another quick movie story. This one is a little more current because, again, I've talked to young people on several occasions over the last few months about this content. And even those that had no clue who Indiana Jones was, I think each and every one of them knew who Harry Potter was. And I trust that you do as well. So I think there were 107 movies or something. I mean, there were just movies and movies, and I loved them and I watched them all. Members of my family read all the books. I didn't go there, but I did watch all the movies. I think we probably watched them twice. Loved it. Let me tell you, I think my favorite scene, and this may not be your favorite. I'm not trying to project at all. But for those that saw the movies, you remember when Harry turned 12 years old. Hagrid, the gamekeeper from Hogwarts, went to pick up Harry to take him to Hogwarts. Hogwarts is the school where they teach wizards how to use and develop their power. And when Hagrid showed up to get young Harry, there was a problem. Harry had no idea that he was a wizard. And Hagrid said, Harry, you're a wizard. Well, here's the deal. I have the joy and the privilege. If you didn't know it, you're a wizard. Can you imagine all that was going on in Harry's head and his heart when he began to think about the power and the possibility that would come with his giftedness? If you're a leader, you're a wizard. You actually have the power to envision a preferred future, to see the unseen, and to rally people to make it a reality. Can you get your head around that? You are a wizard. You don't even have to go to Hogwarts to develop and to practice those skills, but you do have to develop and practice the things needed to leverage your gifts and your talents. You actually got to make a choice. Specifically, you have to make 4 choices. Once you have the head and the heart, the capability to lead, you've got to choose to escape and to stay out of the quicksand. And you do that when you confront reality, when you grow capacity, when you fuel curiosity, and when you actually create change. I'm excited about your future and the organizations you're part of, because I know you are going to change the world. Thanks.